a couple of minutes, but we're just warming up to the discussion. So, Rafi, as I was saying, I absolutely love your name, Muhammad Rafi. It certainly brings a lot of pleasant memories. When I was growing up back in India almost 25 years ago, and yeah, I absolutely enjoy listening to Bollywood songs in the evening when I'm cooking, in the morning when I'm making breakfast, right in the kitchen, in the family room, we'll play some music. And it depends, what you're feeling like, but it ends up a lot of time being Mohammed Rafi's song.
Yeah, I think I have to give the credit for this also to the singer Muhammad Rafee. So I guess my parents and grandparents were a good big fan of Muhammad Rafee, so that's how they named me. But I also used to get teased a lot in school because of the name.
I can imagine that. But do you like Mohammed Rafi's songs?
Yes, I do like, um, but so nowadays I listen to more recent singers, but I do love what Muhammad Rafi did, or Kishore Kumar, or Lata Mangeshkar, and Manna Day, and all those guys as well.
Yeah, this is exactly, gosh, we can go endless in terms of the songs. Any particular favorite from Muhammad Rafi from your side?
From Muhammad
Any
Rafi,
Muhammad Rafi songs that you like particularly?
yeah, I think there were. There's one. I'm just remembering. This is the Tarif Karu Kya.
Oh, that was beautiful, actually. And the way Shami Kapoor, he's in Kashmir in that boat, and Shamla Tagore. It's a beautiful song actually, and the way he jumps and dances,
Yeah, yeah.
that
He really brought it to life. Yeah.
yeah, that combination is very deadly of Shami Kapoor and Mohammad Rafi. They did so many songs. Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite one is really is "Kaun Hai Jo Sapno Mein Aaya." That's a beautiful one, and I think this guy is driving the car and he's driving through the mountains and he sings that song, and it's a beautiful one. Anyway, I'm sure we can talk endlessly about Bollywood and Mohammed Rafi. So, Mohammed Rafi, thank you so much. Very happy that you're joining us on this open source discussions across in the industry. So, Infosys is a global leader in next generation digital services and consulting. With over 336,000 employees, Infosys serves clients in more than 56 countries, delivering innovative and scalable technology solutions. I'm very excited today to talk to Rafee Tarafdar, Chief Technology Officer at Infosys. Rafi, everybody knows about Infosys. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the company.
Yeah. First, thanks so much, Arun, for having me on the show, and really appreciate the partnership here. So I've been with Infosys now for about close to 19 years, and at Infosys I've played a number of different roles. So prior to Infosys, I was involved in a lot of product and platform development. And at Infosys, I largely focus on three broad areas. One is on tech strategy. Second, I focus on working with our clients on strategic programs. And third is building tech talent density within the company, and set up these new kind of roles and new technology initiatives. And as part of it, I also have been driving our own transformation to be a digital first, cloud first, and now an AI first company. So I'm based out of Bangalore in India.
That's beautiful, actually. And the way you said this, it's a constant transformation. It was digital first, then cloud first, now AI first. And staying at the edge of that competitive edge is so much more important and essential for the companies, and particularly for a company like Infosys that is helping customers, because customers are demanding, they need to be enabled, they need to be educated about this. I can imagine the job is very exciting, very rewarding.
No, absolutely. And I think, see, about 5 years back, we also did a slight change in the way we approach these things. And what we said is, we need to walk the talk, which means everything that Infosys advises its clients on, be it on digital, on cloud, or on AI. We said, we need to apply it to ourselves first. And the idea was, if we can use Infosys as a test bed where we can implement a lot of these ideas and innovations at scale, then we ourselves can look at what is working, what is not working, and fine tune our approach, and then take a lot of these learnings and best practices and tools and platforms that we have built as part of this journey to help accelerate our clients. So that actually worked very well for us when we did the entire digital first and cloud first journey, and we are continuing with that approach now that Infosys, is aspiring to be an AI first company. So that's the journey where we are still following the same approach. So it's interesting to, bring that transformation live internally and then also take it to clients. So then I think the satisfaction is 2x.
Right, right. I mean, as they say, eating your own dog food or drinking your own champagne, and then
Sure.
you apply that to the customer because you're not just going out there, but you are a true practitioner as well. Learning,
Yeah.
burning your fingers and say, you know what? No, we have done this. We know how this works and how it doesn't work. And then bringing that expertise to the client is so much more essential.
No, absolutely, and I think we've seen a lot of value with that approach because one, we also have a lot of credibility when we talk about newer ideas, right? And our clients also empathize that, okay, you're not using me as a test bed or a guinea pig, but you have done these at scale, and I've seen that that has lent a lot of credibility to what we tell, and it has also brought about a shift in culture, a culture where everything is engineering first, everything is architecture first, everything is open source first, and a culture where innovation is weaved into everything we do, right? So and also bringing a lot of that product and platform mindset has been key. So a lot of these shifts are things that I have seen happen because we have been able to follow this strategy and approach.
Oh, wonderful. That's a wonderful segue in our very first question. It says, how does Infosys leverage open source technologies in solutions and services? And how do you balance the use of open source software with your own proprietary technologies and offerings?
Yeah, so at Infosys, you see, we have an open source first strategy, which means where feasible and where it is a right fit, we always look at using open source as it could be a framework or a SDK, it could be a tool, it could be a database, it could be a streaming software, it could be a container orchestration tool. But in any area that you look at it, we look at open source first as a strategy, and that's what we have been embracing on and doing. And if you look at it, even within internally, when we are building any tools or when we are building any IP or platform, a lot of technology components are all based on open source, right? So we are a significant user of open source. Now, what we try and make sure is when we build any of these things, we are not building, reinventing the wheel in a way, right? So if there is a solution out there that is fit for purpose, then we do use. But wherever we find white spaces, those are the areas where we look at how do we uh, build something that will do. The second thing that we find a lot of times with open source is, while open source tooling is there, a lot of times you need to bring all of them together in an integrated fashion. Or you may have to drive orchestration in the entire life cycle. And at times, some of these toolings may not be fully enabled to do that. In those cases, then we invest in bringing the orchestration across the different toolings, integration across the different toolings. But the idea always is to uh, innovate on top of open source rather than trying to replicate what an open source solution is doing. Now, while we do a lot of these with open source, we also look for areas where any, a third-party technology from any of our partners, is also a fit for purpose. And if we find that it is fit for purpose, we use it. So while I say that for us, open source first is a strategy, it doesn't mean that we will not use any commercial software or a SaaS software or a PaaS software. So we look at what is the right fit, and then we leverage whatever is best fit for our needs as well as for our client needs.
That's beautiful, actually. So what I'm hearing is not reinventing the wheel. I'm hearing, innovating on top of OSS and being deliberate about open source versus a third party strategy. Those are sort of the key highlights that I hear from this. And I think that's a very balanced approach because end of the day, you have to serve your customers. You have to make sure that it works for them. And open source is a big part of it, but it's an effective part of it as opposed to being just completely open source washing it.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Now, what are the key challenges that your company faces when you are adopting or implementing open source software? You can talk about some of those, orchestration that the tooling is not together. Now, that is particularly very important when you have a timeline to meet customer demand. So, how do you balance that where the customer is like, I want this to be done tomorrow, and in the open source community, is like, oh, we're going to file an issue and we'll wait for the community to fix it. How does that work?
Yeah. So I think, see, a lot of times when we decide to use open source, we also do a lot of vetting and evaluation, right? And the vetting and evaluation is done in several ways. So, for example, one is to look at what is the kind of licensing model and how permissive it is. We look at the security related issues that could be there potentially within that open source software. We look at how strong the community is, because a lot of times, the community plays a very important role in innovation. We look at the frequency of commits that happen within the open source software so that we understand whether it is up to date, whether it is latest or not. And then what we also do is, we run them through a set of checks that we have from an open source standpoint to make sure one, it meets a lot of criterias and guidelines that we have defined for us. So that's the first thing we do with any open source software, that we use at Infosys. Now, when a lot of times when we have to use it for our clients, see, these analysis that we would have done is the first step, which essentially helps the client to understand that is there a risk around this or not. And one other element that I didn't talk about is also the availability of talent or expertise on it, right? Because that becomes an important thing. Now, again, when I look at open source, there could be two types. One is, which could be a framework or an SDK which is used during development time. So, for example, it could be like an Angular, it could be as Java, Spring Boot, or anything else. Now, a lot of times, the level of support that you would expect for these frameworks and SDKs is not that high from a production environment standpoint. But if I talk about a database, if I talk about a cache, if I talk about a messaging platform, if I talk about a workflow or an orchestration engine, see, these require very, very high level of resilience within the production environments. So for this, we generally look for supportable versions of these, right? So sometimes you will find vendors who provide hardened versions of these open source software, and they're also providing 24 by 7 support. So we look for, the versions that are supportable, and we also look at the kind of support that they provide. And ideally, if there is any vendor who is offering premium support from a resiliency, from scale, and from 24 by 7 support, then we partner with them, especially for our client projects and all that stuff, and then we use them. So to your question, also in terms of speed and velocity, see, a lot of times when there are proven open source softwares, I don't see so much of an issue. I think we are able to work with the speed and velocity that most of the clients or solutions require. But if it is a new open source solution for which the community support is limited, for which the vendor support is limited, I think those are the times then, we need to little bit think through and see what do we do and how do we plan for it. And those are the cases there we will work with our key stakeholders to understand, the risk involved and whether it can be managed. See, in certain cases, the risks are managed and can be managed. In certain cases, it cannot be. So there is a due diligence that we do and then decide based on the extent of risk whether we can manage or not, and then take a call. The good thing today also is now with the cloud providers, a lot of managed open source softwares are also being available, right? So in that case, what happens is when you want speed, if I decide to use the managed Kubernetes, managed database, then at least you have somebody who will take care of some of these issues on the cloud, and we can still stay true from an open source standpoint, stay true from a neutrality and standard standpoint.
That's beautiful, actually. I love the way you explained the infrastructure in the beginning of vetting, security related issues, community, frequency of commits, internal checks and guideline, and which you highlighted very well about the availability of talent and expertise. That's a big factor. I don't want to pick up open source project where it's very difficult for me to bring the right talent in and be able to support it internally if I need to. And I also completely understand the perspective of a hard-earned version, a resilient version that will work for the customers. And in that sense, the CSPs do bring up that element very clearly. That okay, you want to stay true to your Kubernetes, but you can run on EKS or GKE or whatever you want to run on, because that is true upstream compatible version, and that gives you that flexibility. And I remember when I got the Amazon EKS team started, gosh, back in 2017, the core tenet was we're going to be upstream compliant. And that's exactly the reason for customers like Infosys that they want to be upstream compliant. We don't want to make our own tweaks and glitches here. Just stay upstream compliant and just make it accessible and scalable.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So actually, there are good comments going along. There's one question that coming from Laura Chakowski. Maybe I'll move that over there. It says, what strategies have Infosys employed to navigate the evolving landscape of open source technology, addressing its biggest challenges and ensuring sustained utilization for driving innovation and growth?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Laura. So what we do at Infosys is, see, we have specialist communities that focus on different technology areas. So there are close to about 11 technology areas that, at an organization level we focus on, right from your experience to APIs to API microservices to data to AI to cloud and cyber security, DevSecOps. There are a whole lot of areas. And what we do is the community actually tracks all the developments that are happening in this space. And some of these could be in terms of patterns and practices. Some of them could be in terms of the open source software that are coming up and the new releases that are coming up. Some of it is in terms of what we find are working or not working, what kind of issues we are seeing, what is the adoption pattern that we see across different clients and across different industries. And what we do is we bring all of this information which comes from the the open source community, from the partner community, from startup community, from research community, and from our clients and our experience. And then we plot them across three horizons: horizon 1, 2, 3. The way we look at is horizon 1 is where the investments are not happening much, which means no new tech investments are being done by our clients. Horizon 2 is where a lot of investments are happening here and now, which means this is an area where most of the investments are going on. And H3 is where we see investments that are likely to happen over the next, let's say, 6 to 18 months, right? And some of these is some things that we track of. So what we do is once we have plotted this across the three horizons, then we see if horizon 2 is going to be more dominant as of now, and that's where the demand is going to come, then we start focusing on the key tooling around it, the key partners around it, the key vendors, the key skills that are required, and then we invest in it. Horizon 3, when we see and we figure out that these are things that are likely to become mainstream in the next few weeks, starting capability. So these are also recommendations we make for anything that goes in H1. Have to start thinking of supportability and availability and in future. And we then think of and including them into our solution platforms. The risk associated, the support available, the community, the talent, and The stability of some of these softwares as well, especially in H3 space, the stability at sometimes may not be that great. So those are the things that we very proactively look at. There may be cases where we may find that they may not be still very mature and stable, but we will still invest because we believe in the potential. Like if I look at the early days of Kafka, we thought Kafka is a great tool that we should invest in, and we started investing from very early stage, and today it is fairly mainstream, right? So that's how we do. And then our partner ecosystem is what will then look for the enterprise support providers for it, that we then curate. So everything then gets driven by our tech compass, which maps tech trends, and then these three horizons.
That's beautiful, actually. 11 tech communities, three horizons, and a tech campus. It's a full machine that is running to make this system work. And essentially, the landscape of open source technologies is evolving so rapidly. Without that machine, you cannot really handle it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and see, that's a problem that we were finding is, today, if you look at, for example, in AI space, every other week there is one or the other variant of a new LLM. There is a new model. Then there are so many new frameworks that are coming up, all in open source space. And we realized is, it's like a treadmill, right? So you're constantly running and trying to catch up. So the only way we can track is if we do it through a distributed community based model. So we said we can't really do it centralized. The way to do it is in a decentralized manner, and that's where these communities. So at Infosys, we have a community called Tech Cohere. So Tech Cohere is our tech community where a lot of the passionate engineers, architects, managers, and all come together, and they are the ones who keep bringing these to us, and they then decide what goes into which horizon, and then they drive a lot of the inputs into the strategy that we then execute at an organization level.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, and this is not the first time, like right now we are seeing LLMs coming out every day. A few years ago, it was a new Kubernetes flavor coming out every day. A few years before that, a new JavaScript framework coming along every day. And anything that is popular, it turns out to be that way. So anyway, let's keep moving. Um, what benefits do you see in using open source software compared to proprietary solutions? You talked about some of those elements. It gives you the scale, it gives you the culture and the talent. But can you give examples where Infosys proposed to implement an open source stack for large programs?
So the biggest benefit of open source is a lot of time the innovation come at a faster pace in open source than see with uh, the platforms. It is that the innovation doesn't happen, but just the sheer amount of software creates a lot of and it's, that's the one big factor of it. And second, so the optionality and choice, right? Because with open source, what happens is you have a lot of optionality and choice that is available to you to decide what is right fit and best fit that we could use. So, at Infosys, when I said we have an open source first strategy. So if you look at it, we run some of the largest tax platforms for the government, and most of these tax platforms today largely run on open source, though they have some proprietary and vendor software as well, but a lot of core components actually run on open source. And if you look at it, today they support more than 100 million citizens. And the volumes in any taxation system, a lot of volumes actually come in the last day, because that's when, either in the last day or a last week, because that's when everybody is doing. So it's almost similar to your Black Friday or a Boxing Day, when this surge in volume happens. So we have been able to use open source to handle that kind of a scale, that kind of a throughput, and the population scale. Uh, you know, uh, the scale that is required for population scale is what we have also been able to deliver. Then a lot of transformation programs that today we do for our global clients that span across a lot of countries. They're all using open source software, be it on see containers today largely de facto is on open source. A lot of databases are on open source. A lot of your web servers are today largely on open source. The messaging is on open source. A lot of data engineering today is on open source. A lot of AI today is on open source. So I think and experience is obviously on open source. So it's fairly pervasive, and we see this integral to almost all the transformation programs that we do here at Infosys, right? So in that way, I think it would be fair to say that it is embedded into everything that we do and use in transformation programs.
That's beautiful. Now, embedded into everything you do, fairly pervasive. And the first example that you quoted was pretty stunning. And you said when you meant the tax system, that is the Indian government tax system, right?
Yeah.
And with India is the largest population in the world, just happened like a few months ago. 100 million citizens, and taxes are like everywhere. You can't avoid them, and you pretty much file them in the last week. A system as significant as that, relying heavily on open source, is a really good testament on how this works about to be. So yeah, thank you for sharing that example. Now, I learned a few weeks ago, months ago actually, that Infosys actually has a strategy on open source, which you've been talking all along, where you also have set up a open source program office at open source. So talk to me, why OSPO is required, and how do you promote open source culture within Infosys? You've talked about several examples by the communities, the horizons and all, but what is the purpose of OSPO at Infosys?
Yeah. See, I think while we've been using open source and we are open source first strategy, and this is something we've been working for more than a decade or so. But I think we have been very good consumers of open source. I think we have not done a very good job in contributing back to the community. While we do it, but it is, in my view, we can be doing a lot more than what we do. So, in order to change the pivot from not only being a consumer but also start becoming a contributor in an intentional way and in a strategic way, we thought, we should do something about it. And with that, we said, okay, let's set up the open source program office. And the goal of the open source program office for us was one, to continue to drive the evangelization of open source, consumption of open source, building this ecosystem and all. Second, also create the playbooks, create the processes, and drive contribution back to the open source community, which we want to do in a very active way. And third is, how do we, participate in some of the leading open source forums? One is to learn the innovations that are happening in the open source space at a much closer level, which is where we started doing this partnership with CNCF, with LFN, and all that. But more importantly, also take a lot of the enterprise things to from our customers to the open source community, right? With that in mind is when we said, let's formalize and create this open source program office. And a lot of standards, policies, processes that we were doing, we also then standardized, automated, made it available to the whole organization. And today we have a dedicated team that runs this office, and then uh, this is ensuring that we are doing well on all those three aspects that I talked about, and also making sure that we now start engaging in the wider community and with the developers across all the markets that we as Infosys work on.
That's beautiful, actually. And I love it how you explain you wanted to change from a consumer to contributor in an intentional and strategic way, because you cannot be on the sideline and expect somebody else to score a three-pointer for you. If I give a basketball analogy, if you have to score a three-pointer in the sense that you cannot file a pull request and say somebody in the community will fix it. So that's where you have to intentionally get into the game, that I'm going to go understand the community dynamics, build that policies, build those processes, have those incentive mechanism within the company, so that we can actually go understand the community dynamics and be able to fix, or at least work with the community members to fix the issues that matter uniquely to Infosys.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's keep going on that. So then, how does Emphasis contribute back to the open source community? Can you give some examples of the contributions that are made by Infosys?
Yeah, so I think we contribute at several levels. First is, we have been looking at open sourcing some of the projects and platforms that we do internally, where we find that there is a value that the larger industry or community can get from it. So we do that. So we have Infosys on GitHub, and you could find a number of different projects that we have done. Like when we did our own DevSecOps platform, we which orchestrated a number of these different open source tools in order to build automation in the entire life cycle. We had open sourced that. So we continuously look for projects that we think could also be of value to the larger community, and then we open source. So that's first level. The second level that we do is we have a number of volunteers as part of our tech community who constantly, when we use these open source software in our projects, a lot of times when we get into issues or we find defects or issues, we then contribute back to the community as well. And what we have done is, if you look at it, there are about 250 plus contributors that are there from Infosys who have been contributing to a number of these different projects. We have made about 3,700 different contributions. We have done about 630 lines of code. Uh, there are about 300 plus repositories to which we have contributed. So while these are things that we have been doing, but I think there is a lot more that we can do. The third level is to then also look at, can we contribute with documentation, with adoption, with the community events that happen within local locations, right? So we have been using Infosys campuses. We have beautiful campuses across India as well as the globe. So we look at how do we bring the community into our campuses and use them in order to talk about different issues specific to those softwares. And now, with our partnership, what we're also looking at is for some of the emerging open source projects, how do we now start helping to shape them, right? So, as part of the partnership that we have done now with CNCF as well as with the Networking Foundation, we have some of our technical members part of the technical committees, and they are helping shape the future of some of the open source programs and projects. And the last thing is, we're also now slowly starting to get into protocol definition as well. So we are looking at some of the projects where we can get involved in defining the specs and protocols. We are involved in some of the population scale projects. Like in India, there is a project at IIITB called MOSIP, which is the digital identity platform. So Infosys also contributes to those. So those are the different avenues that today we contribute in one or more ways.
That's fantastic, actually. 250 plus contributors, 3,700 contributions, 600 plus repos. That's pretty impressive. And docs, adoption, those are all chop wood, carry water work, but that's very important. That keeps those open source projects thriving. And I remember I was talking to some folks from Infosys earlier. A few years ago, I actually came to Infosys for a Kubernetes community day that you
Oh,
folks hosted. It was a beautiful campus, and I really had good memories of that event that happened a few years ago. So I know how deeply Infosys is embedded and engaged in the open source community. So that's pretty awesome of you sharing that systematic ways on how this is happening. Now, can you discuss any specific trends or emerging technologies within the open source space that Infosys finds particularly exciting or impactful? I know you talked about LLMs, but are there other areas? You can talk about LLMs, but are there other areas that you find particularly impactful?
yeah. So I think there are two, three areas that I find very interesting beyond what has been happening in the container space, and so one I would say is AI. Anyways, we talked about it. So we find the whole LLMs and also the frameworks that are coming like LangChain and Tool LLM, and there are a whole lot of other ecosystem that is coming up now. I think That's very interesting. A lot of innovation happening. So that's one area where we believe there is a lot of value in using that. The second I see is WebAssembly, right? So WebAssembly is again pretty powerful and very useful in a number of ways where I can now run the promise that Java had in a way, right? So the potential of something similar is what we could accomplish through WebAssembly as well, and in a lot of applications that we are doing in media, entertainment, device space, in IoT and others are areas that even gaming for that matter and others are things that I'm seeing it would be very relevant. And also now with this being part of the standard, uh, I see that the adoption would go further up. The third area is the entire green computing, because I think as a responsible citizen, given all the focus that is there on ESG, where now we need to track the carbon neutrality, the ESG scope one emissions, scope two emissions, scope three emissions, and so one is being aware, and second is also putting in mechanisms in order to make sure that we are uh, burning carbon in a responsive way, and being able to measure, monitor, track, and do that. More importantly, we are also then looking at how do we do shift left in the entire engineering life cycle, right? So that it is not just about governance and afterthought, but thinking upstream, right from where do you run your workloads? Can I run it on a green data center? Can I choose the right programming languages? Can I choose efficient models or tiny models? Can I then run it in an efficient manner and then track it at a developer level, project level, program level, and at an organization level, right? So that again is something that I think is very interesting and would be very relevant. The other bit, anyway, something that we are always constantly chasing is all on cyber security and privacy, and the responsible AI part of tools which are required. So that is the other area where I think initially when you look at it, a lot of work was happening with proprietary tools, but now I'm seeing a lot of open source tech come in here, which could have an interesting play in this space. So that's the other area that I'm finding fairly interesting developments now.
That is fantastic, actually. Yeah, and you're right. LLMs, WebAssembly, green computing, cybersecurity, responsible AI, those are really very emerging areas. And you folks are all very deeply engaged in that. And I'm just going to give a shameless plug now. Next Friday, I'm actually talking to Bailey Hayes from Cosmonic, and we'll go over the complete landscape of WebAssembly. These folks are at the forefront of creating the WebAssembly standard, contributing to Bytecode Alliance and all. So next Friday, Bailey and Liam and I are going to be digging deep into WebAssembly strategy. And I've been thinking about bringing somebody like you to talk about green computing. So Asim Hussain, who's the who's the director for Green Software Foundation, he's very deep into it. I think those are really very hard areas. So you mentioned CNCF a couple of times. In CNCF parlance, Infosys is an end user. So CNCF has vendors that are provider of technologies, and end user that is a consumer of technology. Infosys joined CNCF at the top tier, the platinum tier, that actually gives you a governing board seat as well. So, what benefit do you see by joining Infosys at the governing board seat? And how do you plan to influence CNCF strategy with this?
Yeah. So one, see today, if you look at it, Infosys actually launched a cloud first and digital first offering in the market called Cobalt, and the today a significant portion of our revenue comes from the digital and cloud projects, and we are doing massive transformation programs for a lot of our clients, and a lot of it is anyways based on the containers and the entire container ecosystem, right? So that's at the heart of a lot of the cloud solutions that are running there. So one, we thought, if we need to participate somewhere, then CNCF is the right forum because that's where most of the innovation is happening. And given our bet at an organization level, we thought, this is the right foundation to get involved. The second thing is, as we work on a lot of these projects and transformation programs, we are finding a lot of interesting challenges and business needs, which are very enterprise specific. So we thought, how do we bring a lot of these enterprise challenges back to the community? How do we become the voice of customer, which is voice of these global 2000 companies, and bring a lot of this voice to the foundation and to the open source community so that their requirements, their needs, and their concerns are also addressed. Because eventually that will then further drive the adoption within this. The third goal for us is, as we work with the board and as we work with the different subcommittees, as we have a view on the future investments that is being done. One, we wanted to make sure this feedback goes in there, and second, we can then take the roadmap and start evangelizing with our clients who are big open source users, so that they also understand what is coming in, right? So in a way, we are looking at bridging the gap between these global two, or more than bridging the gap, I think bringing them together, the foundation, the community with the global 2000 in a cohesive manner.
I think that is fantastic because as a CNCF governing board chair for about 2 years, that is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Bringing that voice of customer, bringing that perspective of global 2000 is so, so, so important. And even though Infosys has joined as the end user, but I really see you acting on behalf of the end users because that's where you have been doing all these cloud native deployments. So personally, I would love to see any of those stories that you have done cloud native deployments. What have you learned, and how that should influence CNCF strategies? So, so, so critical. So I'm very excited that you joined CNCF at the top tier because that really opens up the door for others to see that Infosys sees value in this. Why are not others seeing value in this? So that's very helpful.
Yeah, correct. And also, I think we wanted to show the seriousness with which we are looking at open source, right? So, you put,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now,
the,
you talked
yeah.
about AI first strategy. Infosys is moving towards an AI first approach, big way. It was started with digital first, cloud first, but now AI first. How is that aligned with the joining CNCF part of it?
Yeah, so I think, see, the decision that we did with CNCF was anyways towards the early part of last year, and then we said, for us, CNCF was something that we wanted to do because it is here and now, it is mainstream, we need to do, and I know that there is a lot of evolution that is coming up. Now, if you look at a lot of what is happening in telco space, especially with 5G and 6G, where the entire unbundling of stack is happening, virtualization is happening, we thought again, containers are playing a critical role in that entire unbundling of that 5G stack, and a lot of that is what informed our, the investments into CNCF and this. And then when we started looking at where do we go next from here, and this was a time in early 2022 when we saw that the foundation models were becoming fairly powerful, and when a lot of internal pilots we did show the potential significantly. Uh, Eventually, when I take a lot of these AI services, and then when I have to drive automation in the ML ops cycle, the LLM ops cycle, and then from a deployment for the entire training, inferencing, and the entire engineering life cycle. So a lot of work that we are doing with CNCF, with containers, with DevSecOps, with observability, telemetry, everything else, is still the foundation on which the AI first is happening, right? So for us, the AI first is, if we just do AI first, it's not going to give us any value. So this is based on being digital first, cloud first, and data first, because these are the three foundational blocks that are going to enable us to this. So in that way, the investments in CNCF are the foundation layer that we are putting together in order to help scale the AI products and platforms that we have. And whatever we are building from an ML ops, LLM ops, and the entire pipelines are all based on uh, the container ecosystem that we are using, because even today a lot of our AI services run on Kubernetes and on those containers. Right?
That's beautiful, actually. So what you're telling is that this is a very evolutionary approach as opposed to transformational approach. You're not like shifting the direction, pivoting the direction, something that you have done all along for many years, and you're going to continue to leverage that experience, that expertise in cloud native that you have, and build on top of those practices around LLM, MLOps, whatever you need to do.
Yeah, because see, I'm a big proponent of evolutionary architecture because technology will keep changing. We'll find new technologies coming up, new techniques coming up, new patterns coming up. So, architecturally, how do we ensure that we are able to bring in the right practices and tooling is key for us. So, our entire transformation is based on the premise that as tech evolves, we should also be able to evolve with it and build on it. And at some point, if something needs to be replaced, something needs to be substituted, we should be able to do without significant impact to rest of the ecosystem.
That's fantastic. Rafi, I really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything that I should have asked and I didn't ask you?
No, I think you did a great job, Arun. You covered a lot of stuff that I think is relevant to our journey, relevant to what we want to do. So I think you've done fantastic.
Thank you. I really want to thank your team. Your team has been very patient and understanding in terms of helping me create these questions, craft these questions, because you and I did not rehearse any of this at all, but we
Yes.
did we come up with the questions so that it makes the flow a bit smooth. So really want to thank the folks in your team. They've done a fantastic job. Hopefully, people who are listening, they learned a lot about Infosys. I'm super excited again, super thankful. Thank you, Rafi, so much.
So probably like to a friend, we're talking for the first time. It was good to connect immediately and to you very well. Thank you. Thanks
Absolutely.
for
Yeah, for the folks listening, my name is Arun Gupta. I work as a vice president and general manager for Open Ecosystem team at Intel. If you want to learn about us, go to open.intel.com or follow us on Twitter at open@intel. Um, and you can find me on all usual social media channels or drop a message. So thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off from here. Bye-bye.